Hello everybody, and welcome to the Bearded Fool Gaming. Today we are doing more of this Aether Revolt spoiler discussion. Trying to tidy up the stream a little bit. I got my cards in a better view. Turn our little music in the background. Maybe that'll sound a little bit better for you viewers. Let me know. I appreciate feedback, and I'm trying to mix it up just a little bit. So we are going to go ahead and jump right in. As always, this is going to be primarily focusing on it from a limited perspective, sealed and draft, with a little bit of alternate format discussion in there also. So without further ado, let us start with today's first card. So we're starting with Indomitable Creativity. This is sorcery for X and 3 red. And its effect is that it destroys X artifacts or creatures. And then for each one you destroy, the controller of that creature or artifact reveals cards on top of the deck until they reveal an artifact or a creature, and they put that one into the battlefield. So it's a little weird and a little confusing at first as for the applications, because it's odd for red to get straight up creature removal. You know, they often get a lot of removal, but it's usually in damage and board wipes. You don't often see just straight up red destroy target creature, but this technically does that. Now, the fact that it replaces it is obviously a very red card. And it's also interesting, just all the applications of this, because it doesn't have to be used on your opponent. Although you can use it as a board wipe, you can also use it on yourself. You could potentially set up a deck where maybe you only use 1 or 2 artifacts and creatures, and you use this to essentially tutor them. I'm not sure if that's the best usage, and I'm not sure if this card is going to have some crazy combo or something with it. But nonetheless, it's kind of a cool mythic, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Quote-unquote random effects are always kind of fun, so this seems like kind of a card that'll just be a janky little fun card to goof around with some. The fact that it does hit artifacts and creatures makes it a little bit more relevant in the Kaladesh Limited format. But I don't think it's necessarily a great card by any means at all. Move on to our next card today. We have good old Shock. That's right, they have finally reprinted our good friend, the Shock. So now Shock here is simply 1 red, and it deals 2 damage to target creature or player. It's an instant, it's a solid card. It's no lightning bolt, but it's good to see it back. Although, honestly, I don't think it's going to be that relevant. A lot of creatures really have 3 toughness. Now, I think it is going to be relevant in Aether Revolt Limited specifically because we've seen a lot of 3-drop, 3/2 creatures and such like that. So in that way, I think it will have its uses, but as far as constructive playability, I think there's just better things out there with Incendiary Flow and stuff like that. So as much as I like to see Shock back, I don't think it's going to be impactful in Standard necessarily, but hopefully it has a little bit of a place in the Kaladesh Limited format. Moving on, we have Secret Salvage. So now this is a sorcery for 3 and 2 red, and it simply exiles a non-land card from your own graveyard, and then you search your library for any of that card that you have in there, and then you put them into your hand. So, it seems kind of weird and kind of bad. It requires a lot of setup in that you already have to have something in your graveyard. And then it's 5 mana to maybe draw 3 cards, but not even a guarantee of that. This seems more like a combo enabler, but I wasn't sure what cards this would really go with. And then I remembered that in either Oath or Battle, there is that blue enchantment, I believe, and it says that if you have one of it in your graveyard, hand, exile, and field, then you win the game. So that makes some interesting applications with this, because you could potentially get one in your grave, exile one from your grave, and get the other 3 into your hand to easily put there. And I don't think that's necessarily good by any means, but I do think that is one of the few uses this card would have. Otherwise, I don't think this seems that good. I don't know. I don't think this is going to be used. I think this is total bulk jank rare overall, and definitely doesn't have any usage in a Kaladesh Limited format in any stretch of the imagination. Moving on, we have Skyship Plunderer. Skyship Plunderer is this guy. So now he is a 2/1 flyer for 2, so that's already pretty relevant. He's an uncommon, and whenever he deals combat damage to a player, for each kind of counter on target permanent or player, they get another one of that. So that's interesting because it can do a lot of different things. You can give yourself energy, if you want to gain an extra energy from it. It can give +1/+1 counters, so it works in the blue-green deck really well. And it's just overall a really solid card. Flying in regular Kaladesh Limited was extremely powerful, and I think it's still going to be quite relevant in Aether Revolt Limited, so that's cool to see a card like this. It also has applications, I don't know if there's a poison deck that uses blue, but that seems like, probably wouldn't be used in something like that, but it maybe could be. And then it's also, you can do that on Planeswalkers, so this would definitely have a place in the, Planeswalker deck. So it's definitely pretty interesting, and I think it'll have some playability. I think it's one of those cards that's going to be pretty decent in whatever you play it in, so I'm anxious to see that go up. And welcome to the stream, Bafana. Thanks for tuning in today. So we will keep moving right along here. So after Skyship Plunderer, they have good old Lightning Runner. So this one doesn't have a picture yet, but it's probably a translation from a foreign one or something. So this is a 2/2 creature for 3 and 2 red, and it has double strike and haste. So potentially a 4/4 coming in there, or a 4/2 I guess rather, coming in there for 5 mana. Pretty relevant just with the double strike and haste. That's not an ability that you see together that often. So now its ability is whenever it attacks, you gain 2 energy. And then you can pay 8 energy to simply, untap all your creatures and have an additional combat. What's interesting about this is it also untaps himself. So when he attacks, you're automatically going to get an additional 2 energy. So it's going to be pretty simple to take multiple extra combats with this. And I can see this being an extremely powerful finisher. I wouldn't be surprised to see this in a constructed format like Standard. It seems a little absurd because if you can just have some way out of your creatures attacking and things like that to produce 8 energy, you go infinite. Attack, boom, untap, tap them all again, you get the energy back, and it just seems like it could easily recycle. And I'm actually excited about this card. It seems like a fun build around me card and just seems absurd. It's not that high costed at 5. And it is kind of vulnerable in the 2/2 slot, but the double strike gives it a lot of protection, and the haste allows it to be a really surprising finisher. So, I think this card is awesome and limited. It'll probably have some constructed playability, and I look forward to picking a few of these guys up. They seem really fun to play with. Not sure if they're fun to play against, though, so that'll be something to keep an eye on. Moving on, we have Outland Boar. So this is a creature, simply a 4/4 for 2, a red and a green. And it can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. I'm wondering when they're going to keyword that ability. They're using it so often now. Maybe one day. But anyway, it simply is a solid beater. A 4/4, that's the important part. It does have that magical toughness of 4, so that makes it super relevant. And the fact that it does have that somewhat unblockability, servos can't get in its way, Thopters can't get in its way, it seems pretty strong. Now, a lot of the cards in Kaladesh that had this, can't be chunked ability were not very good, but this guy is so aggressively costed, I think he'll actually be pretty solid. Honestly, wouldn't be super surprised to see it in a constructed deck. I don't know if it's good enough, but it seems like it has the potential for that. Now, as far as limited is concerned, this guy's going to be high pick in red-green aggressive decks, and I see no reason not to play him. Seems like an excellent card, and I'll look forward to playing him if I'm in those colors. Next up, we have Weldfast Engineer. This is an Artificer for 1 a black and a red for 3/3, so it's already pretty decent. And at the beginning of your combat on your turn, you can give one of your artifact creatures +2/+0. It's too bad he can't hit himself, because then he'd be pretty crazy strong. But only doing artifact creatures is pretty limited, and I don't think this guy is amazing. I don't think he'll have any constructive playability by any means. But as far as limited is obviously what this is designed for, he's a decent curve filler as a 3/3. And if you do have, Thopters or something like that that you can give that little buff to, that could be surprisingly relevant because a 3/1 flyer is a lot better than a 1/1 flyer. Again, I'm not amazed by this card, but he'll probably be pretty good in Kaladesh Limited and nothing else. So he is what he is, no complaints. I'll expect to see him semi-regularly there, I'm pretty sure. Moving on, we've got a double X spell. I'm a sucker for these, and this is an interesting one. So now this is a creature for double X that enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters. It's not quite as good as our old friend, the name escapes me because I can't remember names whenever I'm streaming. What was his name? The guy that made, when he died, he made tokens and all that. I don't know. Can't remember him, but it's definitely somewhat of a throwback to him. So now this one is different, though. It has the ability to pay 4 and get a +1 counter on itself, and then you can remove a +1 counter to deal 1 damage. And this seems pretty crazy strong. If you play it for 2 mana, it's not going to be very good. It's going to be a 1/1 for 2, which is bad. Pay for 4 mana, it's still a 2/2 for 4, which is bad, but at that point, it's getting closer to the point where you're going to be able to be putting counters on it. Thank you, Bafana. Hangerback Walker is the card. Thank you for that. So now, obviously, I don't think this is anywhere near as strong as Hangerback was, but I think it's quite strong in a different way. The fact that it does give you that removal aspect of hitting creatures, it gives you the player damage. It seems like this might have some playability in Constructed. I wouldn't be surprised. But I think it's really going to shine in limited decks, and especially in the decks that revolve around the +1/+1 counters. Especially if you have Fairgrounds Tusker or whatever it is that gets a counter if something else gained a counter and things like that. This guy seems like he'll be pretty absurd with that. And then the removal aspect is also super relevant in limited also. So limited, he's a great bomb. This will be a first pick card, no doubt about it. And as far as Constructed, I wouldn't be super surprised, but I'm not holding my breath on it. Moving on, we've got Call for Unity. This is an enchantment for 3 and 2 white. It has Revolt, so if Revolt is triggered, then it gets a Unity counter at the end of your turn, of course. And its ability is that for each Unity counter on it, all your creatures get +1/+1. So this is an anthem for anything. Now, it is expensive at 3 and 2 white, but it seems decent. Like, I think this card is going to have a place somewhere, because if you have a way to somehow abuse Revolt, or to abuse, putting extra counters, like we were looking at with that card before that puts an additional counter, that's pretty relevant, because this is going to be a huge buff. Obviously, I think this is really strong and limited. I think it's going to allow you to just power through. If you get 2 counters on this, it's still going to be relevant because it's going to make everything you play so much stronger. As far as Constructed playability now, it seems a little expensive. Maybe some type of Spirits deck could use this or something like in a mid-rangey. I don't think it's better than Gideon in any stretch of the imagination, so probably won't be used. But it seems cool if it does find a home somewhere. It seems like a fun card to play with, regardless of which format we're talking here. Next up, we have Vengeful Rebel. This is a 3/2 for 3, as we've seen a lot of in this set. And it simply is, its Revolt triggers that it gives a creature -3/-3. So now this is a really good card if you can reliably hit your Revolt. A 3/2 for 3 is pretty run-of-the-mill nowadays, and especially in Kaladesh Limited. But now, if you are able to reliably trigger Revolt, then that is going to be a removal spell and a body, and that's super relevant. Obviously has no Constructed playability, but limited seems like a pretty strong card. This would be something that would probably even pull me into playing black if I already had things to potentially work in Revolt. And I wouldn't be surprised to see this in some type of black-white Revolt limited deck, just really being abused there. Especially if you can find a way to somehow blink this guy or something, that would be really awesome too. Seems like a great card, and I really have no complaints about it. Solid. It's a solid, aggressive creature, and it has removal, and you can't beat that in limited. Next up, we have Aether Whale. So now this is a creature, a 6/4 for 6. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to have flying or anything. But when you play it, you get 6 energy. You can then pay 4 energy to return it to your hand. So it kind of has that pseudo evasion removal in that your opponent can't target it or you'll just bounce it back. But it is a 6/4 with no built-in evasion, no flying, and that's not that good. 4 is a good toughness, but it's not the best toughness for attacking because a lot of times in Kaladesh Limited at least, you got a lot of clogged boards. And we're not talking like Eldritch Moon clogged boards of like 30 cards, but we're talking, 4 or 5 creatures usually on each side, and a 6/4 is not going to be able to break through because you're maybe trade for a 2/1 or something like that. And if you bounce it, you're obviously not going to deal the damage, so I don't think this card is that good. Again, I don't think it has any constructive playability. It's obviously made as like a blue bomb in limited, but compared to the bombs that we had in blue, in standard Kaladesh blue, it's nowhere that good. I don't think this is high pickable. I think it's playable, but not something that I'm looking forward to seeing. Next up, we finally have one with a picture again. And so we have Implement of Improvement. So now this is a cycle of cards where they do, they're artifacts that are cheap. Whenever they die, you draw a card, and then you can pay a colored mana and get their ability for each card. So now for Improvement, it's the white one, quote unquote, and it's really bad. I mean, I'm just going to be straightforward here. This is a 1-drop artifact for 1. Okay, now Bafana here in chat says that Aether Tidewell does have flying. So now if it does have flying, then that changes a lot of what I was just saying because that makes it a super relevant threat. So definitely if that's a typo on MTG Salvation's part, they need to fix it, but that changes the whole card, and I may have to reevaluate that one once the actual image is revealed. But going back to the Implement of Improvement here, this one is simply an artifact 1. You pay a white, sack it, you gain 2 life, and then of course when it dies you draw a card. It's not good. I mean, you may be cantripping, but you're paying, essentially you're paying 1 in the white, gain 2 life, draw a card, and that's not playable. This does let you trigger Revolt, but even at that I don't think it's good. This is a jank card, and I don't think it has any playability in anything unless you're just absolutely desperately looking for a 1-drop curve filler for some reason, and even then it's questionable. So sorry, Implement of Improvement, you are not looking good. So next up we have, nope, I think I skipped ahead here horribly, oops. We have Implement of Ferocity. So now this is the red implement, or sorry, the green implement rather, and this one is a 1-drop, of course, and this one is probably the best one of the implement cycle. So now this ability is to pay a green and sack it, and you put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. It's unfortunate that they limit this to sorcery speed, but I guess they were trying to keep this in line because compared to the other implements, the +1/+1 counter is by far the most relevant. So I guess that was a balancing act they wanted to do. But this one seems strong. This will definitely have some limited playability, and a lot of it, I believe. I mean, I would not be surprised to see this pretty often. It plays into the +1/+1 counter themes really well, and it draws you a card along with giving a counter. So if there was a card that simply said, an instant that said 1 the green, put or a sorcery that said 1 the green, put a +1 counter on a creature and draw a card, that would be playable potentially. And considering this does also work with Revolt, it also works with the Artifact Matters theme, it seems like a pretty solid card, honestly. Next up we have Bolral's Expertise. So now this is a sorcery for 3 and 2 blue, and it's your big bounce spell of the set. You return up to 3 artifacts and creatures to their owner's hand, and then you get to do the normal expertise thing of playing a card that's cheaper, 4 or less. I don't think this card is very good. I don't think it's awful necessarily in limited. Obviously, again, no constructive playability. That's the theme of the day. The fact that it lets you play a free 4-drop or less is kind of good, but I don't know. I don't see this card being that strong. It's not even a global bounce. It's just up to 3, and I mean, it does let you trigger Revolt. It does let you, return your own stuff, if you're wanting to replay it or something, but pseudo removal spell for your opponent's board. But I don't know. I don't think it's that good. I don't think this card is anything to write home about. It's probably the weaker of the expertise cycle that I've seen so far. So, not a high first impression here. Maybe I'm wrong, but just not impressed with this. Moving on, we have the red implement here. This is the implement of combustion. So now its ability is pretty irrelevant as always. It's a 1-drop for 1. You pay a red to deal 1 damage to target player only. And that's what kills this card. It's just not good. Dealing 1 damage is, for the most part, completely irrelevant. If it could hit creatures, it would have playability. But as is, it's not worth playing. I don't even think, like I said, I would put this one generally on the same one as the white one. And it's going to be hard to even play it, even if you are wanting to trigger the revolt and things like that. It's just so irrelevant. And of course, the drawing a card is just replacing it, so why not just play something better in its place? I'd much rather have a shock than an implement of combustion, so once again, not impressed with that. Next up, we have Baral himself in Baral, Chief of Compliance. He is a 1/3 legendary creature. Oh, look out, Tiny Leaders players, you got a new one. And it makes all your instants and sorceries cost 1 less. And whenever one of your spells or abilities, of course, counters your opponent's spell, or actually doesn't have to be your opponent's, any spell, then you draw a card and discard a card. If you didn't have to discard, he'd be pretty absurd, but as he is, he does let you loot every time you counter a spell. I really like this guy, actually. I think he is just cool. I don't think that he's mind-blowingly powerful, but I think that he'll probably have some playability in something like Tiny Leaders, probably. He'll probably have some playability maybe in the Dynavolt decks that we see. As far as limited goes, I don't think he's going to be super strong, but I definitely don't think that he's bad by any means. I think this is a very solid card. A 1/3 for 2 is pretty average. If you do have enough instants and sorceries in limited to somehow make that ability relevant, then that's going to be pretty awesome. But obviously counter spells aren't a big thing in limited, so this definitely seems like something that's more of a build around me card. So now, if there can be some interesting type of control deck coming out that uses him, I'd like to see that, but I'm not really expecting anything because he is so vulnerable. You know, no built-in evasion, no protection on himself. So we'll see what happens, but I like the card a lot, but again, I'm not expecting much to come from it outside of, you know, maybe one deck that we see. So next up we have the final, no, wait, 2 more implements. So we've got Implement of Malice here. As the implement cycle is proving to us today, they are not very good, and this one is one of the worst. So we got a 2-drop, unfortunately, in this one, and it simply is pay a black to make your opponent discard it. Well, anybody discard a card, and then whenever it dies, of course, you draw a card. You know, making your opponent discard is really irrelevant in any format, basically, unless you're playing, like, you know, Vintage or whatever. But that's a whole nother ball game. And it's just not a good card. Maybe use it on yourself to trigger Madness, but no, there's much better things for that. So there's just... this card doesn't have a place anywhere. It's not going to be limited played. It's not going to be constructed played. It's just bad jank. And I understand they have to print bad cards, and I don't have a problem with that, but this is a bad card. If you ever need to look at a bad card, this is it. Next up, we do have the final implement, and this one is, it's almost good, but it still manages to be just enough bad. So this one costs 3, and that's where it kills itself. And it has to pay a blue to draw a card, and then when it dies, you draw a card too. So you essentially can pay 3 and a blue to draw 2 cards at instant speed. And that's not that good. I mean, you kind of got to take what you can get, I guess, but eh. I could see this having minor playability in limited if you're needing, you know, artifact matters in blue just to have that additional 2-card draw, but as is, it just doesn't seem that strong. None of the implements are supposed to be good. Green one is by far the best, and this one is probably second, but even as that is, it's still not good at all. So I definitely wouldn't be surprised to see this rarely, but it's going to be a filler. It's not something you play because you want to. So next up, we've got Hidden Stockpile. This is an enchantment for a white and black with Revolt, and it is, you know, if Revolt triggered that turn, you get a survey. And then you can pay 1 to sack a creature and scry 1. The fact that it does make creatures is somewhat relevant if you can consistently and reliably trigger Revolt. And the scry ability is kind of neat. don't think there's necessarily any constructive playability here. I don't think it's that good. Maybe I'm underestimating it because this seems like a card that I could underestimate. And the ability to consistently create a creature for free each turn may be more relevant than I'm giving it credit for. As is, you know, it can be an enchantment that does nothing and requires other cards to do anything. So it seems pretty bad overall. I don't expect this card to do anything super relevant. Moving on, we have Solemn Recruit. This is a 2/2 creature for 1 and 2 white with double strike. We have a few cards instead with double strike, it seems. And its revolt trigger is that it gets a +1/+1 counter in turn. So that's pretty cool. You know, a 2/2 double strike for 3 is not the worst thing ever, and a 3/3 double strike for 3 is pretty awesome. And if you can keep that going and make more revolt triggers, then that's awesome, and we are totally happy to see that. So, you know, even if this guy just gets a couple counters, a 4/4 double strike is so relevant, and anything above that is just absurd. So this guy seems like one of those answer me or lose cards for sure, and definitely has extremely high limited playability. As far as constructed, unless there's some type of revolt deck comes out, I don't think he'll be used. But, you know, maybe I'm wrong. You know, he's a dwarf, so maybe if there's some type of dwarf deck that comes out, he might have a place. But otherwise, I'm not too impressed for a constructed view here. Yeah, that's a good point, Buffan. I assume you're talking about stockpile that we were looking at there. That definitely could be an application of it. Still not super amazed by that, but, you know, there could be some implications somewhere. And then as far as Solemn Recruit, you know, I'm anxious. I hope to get a couple of those just because they seem pretty strong. But again, I'm not. It's not a card that I'm going to have to get to make myself happy. Next up, we have one of the flashier mythics in the set, and this is Exquisite Archangel. This is a 5/5 flyer for 7, 5 and 2 white. It's kind of a little throwback to Platinum Angel, but it's an interesting one. So now, if you would lose the game, and of course this has to be on the field to be relevant, of course, you instead exile it, and your life total becomes equal to your starting life total. This seems like a card that would be pretty cool in something like EDH, and it seems like something that would be pretty fun in like Two-Headed Giant and things like that too. But overall, it just seems like a fun card more than a super duper build around me card or anything like that. Obviously a 5/5 flyer, it's a curve topper in limited. A 5/5 flyer is extremely strong, and to give that, you know, potential to not lose the game is extremely strong too. The fact that it does, you know, have to, you know, be on the field to trigger and everything, you know, leaves it kind of open to playing around it. You know, oh, I'm going to swing out. They say no blocks because they think they're not going to lose. You kill it, then they lose anyway. Seems like there's some interesting counterplay in that regard. And I like the card a lot. You know, I'm anxious to see this one played just for the lulz, but I don't expect anything amazing other than it just being a solid 5/5 beater. It's definitely an excellent limited card, and hopefully I'll pick a few of these up. Next up, we got one of my favorite cards in the set in Cogwork Assembler. So this is a 2/3 for 3. It's an assembly worker, so it can be tutored by our friend from Kaladesh there. And its ability is to pay 7, and you create a token of any artifact, and then you know, it's exiled at the end of turn. This seems like a pretty cool card. It definitely requires either build around me or something that works really well with it. But even if you can just get something like a Puzzle Knot, you know, you definitely don't want to be paying 7 mana for a Puzzle Knot, but it gives you that late game mana sink. And that's where this guy really has a home. I've read some people's opinions that he might be used in something like Tron, you know, in the older formats and things like that. And I'm not super familiar enough with that deck to say for sure. But he seems pretty fun. You know, I think, you know, paying 7 to make another Gearhulk, or paying 7 to make another, you know, whatever, is just going to be a fun ability to use. And hopefully this will be used in some cool combos. You know, if you had a way to make 7 mana off of the token somehow, that would go infinite immediately. So there's definitely some interesting implications from this, and I think there'll be some cool combos and things like that come out. Definitely a Johnny-ish card, and I like it. I don't really have any complaints on this. As far as his stats and stuff, you know, he's a 2/3 for 3, so that's not too bad. There's definitely a lot of 3 power in this set, though, so he's probably not as good as others, but I mean, if you think about it, he can also make blockers. You know, he can make a copy of himself to block with and such, so this is one of those cards that kind of has more to do with it the more you think about it. And so I think he's honestly going to be one that's underestimated and turns out to be pretty solid. Now, it does depend upon the speed of the format because 7 mana is a ton of mana, and that won't be super easy to do. So we'll see where he goes, but I'm hoping to see this guy pick up some. Next up, we have Renegade Will Smith. This is a 3/2 for 3. That is 1 of red and a white. And its ability is simply when it becomes tapped, target creature can't block this turn. This guy is actually pretty awesome, I believe. First of all, he's a pilot, which is relevant. So if he crews, if he attacks, like he just does so much here. So let's say you just have him. If you just have him, he potentially is unblockable if your opponent only has 1 creature, and a 3/2 unblockable for 3 is good. The fact that he is not just unblockable himself, but can make your whole team unblockable if they only have 1 creature is an implication of him. He also triggers on if he crews, and he's just a solid creature in general. A 3/2 is definitely, it's the theme of the set, but it's still solid and aggressive. I think this guy is really strong. I think he is going to win so many games when people are going to underestimate him. And that ability to just reliably, that can't block every turn is just going to be really, really powerful. Red-White was already one of the strongest deck types in Kaladesh Limited. And I think with stuff like this, it's going to continue to be. Like, this would be, I believe this would be first pickable over some of the rares in Limited for sure, just because he's so many things you can do with them. And he's going to do so many things so well. So definitely, this is a... I don't even think he's going to be a sleeper. I think people are going to realize how good this guy is, and they are going to be a hot pick for sure. Moving on, we have Spire Patrol. So now this is a 3/2 flyer for 4. We already know flying is pretty relevant in Kaladesh Limited, hopefully in Aether Revolt Limited also. Its ability is that whenever it enters the battlefield, you frost a creature opponent controls. So frosting, of course, is my slang for tapping something that doesn't untap. This seems like a pretty solid card. It's definitely, it has that 3/2 that is the theme of the set. It's flying, which is super relevant, as I already stated, and frosting a creature is a pretty solid ability, and one that we haven't seen too much of in Kaladesh in general. This guy's no Cloud Blazer by any means, but he definitely seems strong in the Blue-White Flyers deck, or, in anything like that. No constructed playability, but he is a good blink target and things like that, and he just seems solid. No complaints here. I'm going to play him if I'm in blue-white, but it's not going to force me to play blue-white or anything like that. And our final card of the day is good old Gifted Aetherborn. This guy is no Vampire Nighthawk, but he's not too bad. He's a 2/3 for 2 black, Death Touch, and Lifelink. So now, Death Touch is whatever, that's only sometimes relevant, but Lifelink is an awesome ability in Limited. And a 2/3, he trades with pretty much all of the cards in the set that are 3/2s. He kills out your servos, and he just makes so many blocks, so many attacks rather, unfavorable, because if he's there to block, that's a potential tempo swing that's just ridiculous. So Gifted Aetherborn definitely seems like an extremely solid card. Now, the 2 black does make it a little awkward because you obviously want this guy on turn 2. So he's not going to be able to be played in every deck. But now, if you are able to focus on black as one of your draft colors or something, I think this guy will be pretty strong. And considering black already has a few other lifelinks and such, I think black is going to be a little better in Aether Revolt Limited just because of cards like this. Again, it's no Vampire Nighthawk, but this is definitely a solid card. As far as constructed playability, he is a vampire, and that's actually pretty relevant. I don't know if he's good enough to go in the vampire decks or not, because, again, I'm not super familiar with that archetype. But I think he has potential to. I mean, Vampire Nighthawk saw some play, and it was pretty good. So flying is definitely an interesting trade-off for 1 mana, but we'll see what it does. I wouldn't be surprised to see this guy pop up in a few different things. I've also read some opinions that he may be used in some older formats for things that use devotion and things like that. So we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised again to see this guy just here and there throughout time. He just seems like a solid creature. And as of today, we can go into a refresh, make sure nothing else has come out. Yep, that is it. So Aether Revolt Limited is looking to be, once again, a super fun set. There's a lot of fun, creative cards in this format. And there's just so much to build off of with the Kaladesh Limited. I'm definitely anxious to play with this, and I'm getting more and more excited for the pre-release as I see more and more things. So definitely is going to be super awesome. To answer your question there, Bafana, my favorite card in the set, that is a hard question to answer because I haven't seen the full set. Only 82 out of 84. Let me take a skim through here and I'll tell you just some of my favorites as I see them. Probably Mechanized Production is my favorite. I just like the card. It's one that I want to build around, and just in general, I think it's just a funny, cool card. So this is probably my favorite one in the set as of right now. That could change, but I'll give the glory to that one for the moment. But you know, again, just Aether Revolt in general just seems awesome. I've no really complaints about it. There's really the only bad cards we've seen are those new artifacts and such. You know, the whatever they're called, the implements and such. So seems like Wizards really knows what they're doing with this. They're definitely building off of what was established. They're giving us a lot more stuff to play around with, and there's going to be a lot of stuff going on in Standard. We've got some answers to the big things and such. Rago, if you're referring to Mechanized Production, I do have a deck idea with this. What I'm going to do, and it's probably not going to be good, is I'm going to work on a blue-white tokens deck. And this is just a theory right now because I have to see what else the set offers. But it seems to me using stuff like, you know, Servo Exhibition, you know, maybe the White Expertise and things like that. You know, maybe even the guy that you, the Servant Lord from Kaladesh you can pay for to make a servo, things like that. Along with like counter spells and just generic control elements. You know, white for removal, blue for control, and just overall just get 8 servos as fast as possible and then drop Mechanized Production on there. Clues are definitely another way to do it. I've seen some decks. I've seen a green-blue kind of deck using, you know, why can I not remember card names? I can do it any other time except when I'm live. Tireless Tracker, and, you know, land that, you know, like Evolving Wilds and things like that to kind of get clues out as fast as possible. And I don't know. You know, we'll see if anything comes. You know, is there a card in Standard right now that says like return all lands from your grave to play or something like that? You know, you could do that with Tireless Tracker and get 8 clues potentially. Yeah, there's a lot of different applications for that. I'm definitely going to work on the blue-white tokens myself, which will have 2 different win cons. It'll have the win con of Mechanized Production, and it'll also have the win con of going wide with tokens too. And hey Jay, welcome to the stream. So your favorites are Riskar and Heart of Kiran. So let's see, I know what Heart of Kiran is. What was Riskar again? Let's see if we can figure out which one a Riskar is here. Riskar. Not super familiar with the names yet, so I'm about to take a glance here. Riskar, which one are you? Riskar, here we go. Pima Renegade. Oh yeah, he's the +1 counter guy that ramps. Yeah, he seems pretty interesting. Oath of Ajana, yeah, there's definitely a lot of +1/+1 counter shenanigans and stuff that can go on with things like that. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a green-white aggro, a green-white token deck of some type pick off like that. I could definitely see something like that being pretty strong. But, you know, I mean, overall, I think there's a lot of deck ideas that are coming out of this. I think there's a lot of openness to the format. You know, this Standard is weird because it's kind of one of the most open Standards I've played in, and it's kind of one of the most closed off at the same time, because it's like, it's weird because there's like 8 different decks, which is awesome, but it's like each week one of those decks just dominates, and basically everyone uses Smuggler's Copter, so that's why I'm so happy to see, you know, Fatal Push here. Going to be Fatal Pushing a lot of Smuggler Copters out of the sky there, so. Yeah, so something like that. I mean, there's just all kinds of combos and things that are open now. I mean, this Kaladesh has opened up all kinds of creative deck building options, and it's just really cool to see where they're going with this. You know, I'm excited to see, you know, what this opens up for us as far as options and such. So it seems like all the different colors are getting a lot of love and stuff. Yeah, Aetherworks is definitely going to be hard to break through, and you know, I mean, there are options, you know, for it. You know, there's definitely, you know, things like, you know, decommission that can be used against it and stuff. But you know, maybe even something like consulate crackdown. I don't know. There's just a lot of options, and that's what's really good about this format, I think, and what's going to be good about this set releasing. I'm hoping that with this new extended rotation, we don't get stuck in a stagnant pool of, you know, new collected company or something. But I don't think so. I think that they're definitely printing some answers to everything, and that's what is required in order to keep a meta, to prevent it from becoming stale, is, you know, having answers to everything that's good. And as long as you do that, I think that that allows you to just have a variety of decks, because everything keeps answering everything, and things constantly evolve and things like that. Going back to your previous question, as far as favorite cards, one of my favorites, probably as far as playability will be, is Pacification Array. I think this card's going to be really, really fun to play with in Limited because I'm a troll. And I think that's just a really, really trolly and a really solid card, too. But overall, you know, I think there's a lot of things that are going to be interesting in Kaladesh Limited, especially. Just I'm still worried about it being too fast of a format because there's just so much aggressive stuff coming out. But you know, I'm anxious to see. You know, I'm anxious to play with it, and it's just a couple weeks off. So again, as always, pre-releases are coming up on the 14th and 15th, with the releases and game days and such following weeks afterward. So if you guys have any other feedback on the stream, on the channel in general, anything like that, I appreciate it. For right now, I am going to go ahead and call it there. If you have anything that you would like me to cover, any other things that you would like me to discuss, leave some comments. I will definitely look into doing that. As of right now, this has been the Bearded Fool, and I am signing off. I'll catch you guys next time.